Hanako Yamamoto kept her face close to the window of the transport truck, watching the American landscape pass by. It was a sea of green, with large farmhouses scattered across the fields that looked impossibly wealthy. As a former textile worker from Osaka, she had been told that America would be suffering from the effects of the war. Instead, all she could see was an abundance that made a mockery of everything Japanese propaganda had taught her. "Look at all those houses," Emiko, a young teacher who had been captured during the evacuation of Saipan, whispered beside her. "Even the smallest ones have electrical lines running to them." The convoy of trucks, carrying 43 Japanese female prisoners, finally passed through a set of gates with a sign that read, "Camp Rower, Arkansas." Hanako felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach as the American guards walked towards them. However, their attitude seemed businesslike rather than threatening, a world away from the cruel treatment she had been led to expect. "Welcome to Rover," announced a woman in uniform, Staff Sergeant Betty Collins, speaking in slow and clear Japanese. "You will now be processed, given your housing assignments, and told about the camp's daily schedule." As the women stepped out of the truck, Hanako noticed a peculiar sound. A low, constant hum of machinery was coming from several of the buildings. A fresh scent of soap and clean laundry also drifted towards them on the warm Arkansas air. Through the open doors of one building, she could see what looked like long rows of identical white machines. "What are those machines?" she asked another prisoner in quiet Japanese. "I'm not sure," the woman replied, "but they make a sound like the big mills back in our home city." During the processing, every woman was given a numbered identification card, a brief medical checkup, and a small bundle of supplies. The bundle contained more soap than Hanako had seen in the last several months. This level of abundance was confusing. In Japan, soap was now a precious item, saved only for very special occasions. "Tomorrow you will have an orientation about the services here at the camp," Sergeant Collins explained. "We offer educational classes, sports, and other activities, and we have many facilities to ensure your health and good spirits." That night, lying in the barracks on a real mattress that was softer than anything she had ever slept on in Japan, Hanako listened to the other women whispering about what would happen to them. "Did you notice all the power lines?" asked Miko, who had been a nurse. "Every single building here has electricity. Back home, only the richest neighborhoods had that." "Perhaps it's just for show," another woman suggested from the darkness. "They want to make us believe America is wealthier than it is." But Hanako thought of the faces of the American staff. They looked tired from their work, but they were all well fed. Their uniforms were clean and showed no signs of being patched up or rationed. Whatever this place was, it was not the struggling, war-torn nation their leaders had described. All through the night, the strange humming of the machines continued, a mysterious sound that promised to reveal things that would challenge everything they thought they knew. The next morning, Hanako got her first look at what would be the most incredible discovery of her time as a prisoner. Sergeant Collins was leading the group to the orientation building when they passed a long, low structure. From inside, they could hear the rhythmic sounds of sloshing water and mechanical turning. "What is in that building?" Emiko asked in her limited English. "That's the laundry facility," Collins answered, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "It's one of our most popular services here." Looking through the building's large windows, Hanako saw something that made her stop in her tracks. There were rows and rows of gleaming white machines, each about the size of a small desk. Inside them, water was churning, and they were being operated by both American staff and other Japanese prisoners who seemed to be there by choice. "Those machines?" Hanako started to say, but she couldn't find the words to describe what she was seeing. "They're electric washing machines," Collins explained, seeing the look of pure astonishment on their faces. "Each one can wash 20 pounds of laundry in just 30 minutes. We have 12 of them running all day." The idea was impossible for them to grasp. In Japan, doing laundry was a task that took hours of scrubbing clothes by hand in cold river water, using tiny pieces of soap that were strictly rationed by the government. These machines could do that same work in a fraction of the time, using endless hot water and as much soap as you wanted. "That's impossible," whispered Michiko. "No one could have machines like that." "Would you all like a demonstration?" Collins asked, a clear sense of pride in her voice. Inside the laundry building, Hanako was staring as if she had seen a miracle. The machines were even more amazing up close. They were bright white appliances with small glass windows on the front. Through the glass, they could see clothes tumbling over and over in hot, soapy water. The heat alone was a luxury they couldn't have imagined. The facility supervisor, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Dorothy Jenkins, showed them how to operate one. "You put the clothes in here," she said, pointing to the drum. "Then you add the soap here, set this timer, and the machine does the rest. It washes with hot water, it agitates, it rinses, and then it spin dries." "Spin dries?" Hanako repeated, completely captivated. "Watch this," Mrs. Jenkins said. She opened a machine that had just finished its cycle and pulled out the clothes. They were only slightly damp and would need just a short time hanging on a line instead of the entire day it usually took for hand-washed clothes to dry. Just then, a Japanese woman named Reiko, who had been working in the laundry for a few weeks, came over to their group. "Hanako-san, you will not believe this," she said with a wide smile. "They actually pay us to learn how to use these machines. They give us American money for doing our own laundry." "They give us money for this," Reiko continued, her eyes wide with a sense of newfound possibility. "We earn camp credit we can use at the store, just for learning a skill that makes our lives easier." Mrs. Jenkins told us that machines like this are in many American homes. Regular families have them. The meaning of her words hit Hanako with incredible force. If ordinary families in America owned technology that seemed like a fantasy to Japanese workers, what did that truly mean about the power and wealth of the two countries? Can we touch one?" Emiko asked in a hesitant voice. Mrs. Jenkins gave them a warm smile. "Honey, before the week is over, you'll be running them all by yourself. We're big believers in learning by doing." As Hanako placed her hand on the smooth, cool metal of an electric washing machine, a deep realization settled over her. Everything she'd been taught about America's technological strength had been a catastrophic lie. 3 weeks after her arrival, Hanako stood confidently next to electric washing machine number 7. She carefully poured a measure of soap powder, working under the patient watch of Mrs. Jenkins. The process had become a normal part of her day, but the feeling of wonder was still there. Each completed cycle felt like she was watching a small miracle. "That's the perfect amount, Hanako," Mrs. Jenkins said with praise in her voice. "You're turning into one of our best operators here." All around the facility, a dozen other Japanese women were working alongside the American staff. Their initial shock had been replaced by a growing sense of skill and confidence. The way they moved and spoke was different from their first fearful days at Camp Rower. "Mrs. Jenkins," Hanako said, speaking slowly in her improving English, "I wanted to ask a question. These machines, about how many families in America own one?" "Oh, I'd say about 30% of all households in the country," Mrs. Jenkins replied. "It's higher in the cities and a bit lower in the countryside. But more and more people are getting them every year. 30%. Hanako tried to do the math in her head. If America had enough extra electric washing machines to supply a prison camp, while nearly a third of their civilian population already owned them, what did that imply about the country's massive industrial capacity? That afternoon, another surprise was announced. Mrs. Jenkins told them that a few prisoners would be chosen to receive advanced training on some brand new machine models that were being brought to the camp. "It's called the Bendix automatic washer," she explained, pointing to a shiny new appliance that looked even more futuristic than the ones they were using. "It has fully automated cycles, different temperature choices, and it can hold more laundry." Reiko put her hand up. "Mrs. Jenkins, why would you give prisoners such expensive new machines?" Mrs. Jenkins paused and answered thoughtfully. "Because we have found that teaching people useful skills gives them a sense of purpose and hope. Also, machines like this will be standard in almost every American home in the next 10 years. We are helping prepare you for the future." The casual way she assumed that Japanese prisoners would need to know about American household technology was startling to Hanako. "Did they think the prisoners would stay in America forever?" "Mrs. Jenkins," Emiko asked quietly. "What will happen to all these machines when the war is over?" "Some will probably stay here if this camp is turned into a trade school," she answered. "Others might be given to towns or communities that need public laundry facilities. In America, we try not to let anything go to waste." That evening, as Hanako folded a stack of clothes that had been perfectly cleaned in minutes instead of hours, she wrote a letter in her mind to her sister back in Osaka. It was a letter that could likely never be sent, describing miracles that would likely never be believed. "Dear Kiko," she imagined writing, "today I used a machine that washes a huge pile of laundry in 30 minutes with all the hot water and soap I could want. The Americans have many of these machines, and they are teaching their enemies how to use them. I don't think I understand this war anymore." From outside the barracks, the steady, gentle hum of the electric washing machines carried on through the night. 12 machines running almost non-stop, washing clothes for prisoners who were learning that their captors' entire world was built on abundance, not on scarcity. The question that kept Hanako awake was whether Japan could ever hope to win against a country that could so easily provide such luxuries to its enemies. 6 months later, Hanako was finally given permission to write her first real letter home, which would be sent through the Red Cross. She sat in the laundry facility during her break, the soft humming of the machines all around her. She found it difficult to choose words that wouldn't sound like a wild fantasy to her family, who were suffering through wartime rationing back in Japan. "Dear honored family," she wrote slowly, "I am in good health and am being treated well. The Americans here have facilities that show their industrial power is much greater than we were told." How could she possibly explain that prisoners of war had access to technology that most people in Japan couldn't even dream of? That she had learned to operate machines that did in minutes what took the women of her country hours of painful, back-breaking work? "Hanako-san," a voice called out. It was Yuki, a former factory manager who was now the unofficial coordinator for the prisoners in the laundry. "Mrs. Jenkins would like to see you about the new..." She wanted to discuss the new training program with you. In the supervisor's office, Mrs. Jenkins had technical manuals and photographs spread across her desk, all showing even more advanced models of washing machines. "Hanako, you have a remarkable talent for mechanics," she began. "We are starting a special program to train some prisoners to become appliance repair technicians." She pointed to some complex diagrams in one of the manuals. "These are skills that will be very useful to you, no matter where you are after the war." The meaning behind her words was unmistakable. The Americans were assuming that at least some of the prisoners would choose to stay in the United States, starting new lives in a country where electric washing machines were quickly becoming a normal part of every household. "Mrs. Jenkins," Hanako asked, her voice hesitant, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, dear." "Your own family, do you have a washing machine like these ones?" Mrs. Jenkins smiled. "We have a smaller one at our house. My husband bought it for me last year to help with the chores while I'm working long hours here at the camp. It cost around $300. It was expensive, but it's been worth every penny for the time it saves me. $300. The amount was more than Hanako had earned in 2 full years working at the textile factory in Japan. To hear such a large sum of money mentioned so casually revealed an economic truth that shattered everything she had been led to believe about the wealth of their two nations. Later that afternoon, they had a surprise visitor. Captain Robert Morrison, who was the camp's coordinator for technical education, came to tour the laundry facility. He was clearly very proud of how well the program was doing. "Ladies," he announced to all the women working there, "I have some news for you about your opportunities after the war ends. Several large appliance companies have told us they are interested in hiring skilled technicians, and they do not care about your country of origin." A deep silence fell over the room. The idea of staying in America, of having a job working with the incredible machines they had learned to master, was both a wonderful and a deeply unsettling thought. It felt like a betrayal to even consider it. "Captain Morrison," Reiko asked carefully, "what about our families back in Japan?" "That will be a personal choice for each of you to make once the war is over," he replied. "But I wanted all of you to know that America has a place for skilled people who understand how to work with modern technology." After the captain was gone, the women went back to their work, but a thoughtful quietness had settled over them. Every wash cycle they started now represented more than just clean clothes. It was a look into a possible future where hard manual labor could be a thing of the past. "Hanako," Yuki said in a low voice, "sometimes I'm not sure if we are prisoners or students." She looked around the facility, at the amazing machines, at the American supervisors who treated them with professional kindness, and at the other prisoners who were learning skills that could give them a future they could never have dreamed of in a war-torn Japan. Hanako realized that the difference between the two had started to fade. She was being taught by her captors, learning about technologies that proved their civilization's power more completely than any victory on a battlefield ever could. 1 year after she first arrived at Camp Rower, Hanako stood before a congressional committee in Washington, D.C. She was there to give testimony about the treatment of prisoners and the technological education programs. The irony of the situation was clear to her. She was a former enemy of the state, explaining to American lawmakers why it was in their country's best interest to teach prisoners how to use washing machines. "Mrs. Yamamoto," said a Representative Thompson from Arkansas, "you've described in detail the technical training given to Japanese prisoners. Some of my colleagues are questioning if we should have spent these resources on enemy nationals." Hanako, who was now dressed in a simple but well-made dress and spoke English with confidence, chose her words with great care. "Congressman, learning to operate your machinery taught us more about America's real power than any piece of propaganda ever could have. Please explain that statement,"
he said. "When I first arrived in America," she continued,
"I believed that your industry was primitive compared to what we had in Japan. Using your electric washing machines showed me that the exact opposite was true. The entire textile industry of Japan could not produce the kind of machines that were being given to us, as prisoners for everyday use." In the public gallery, she could see Mrs. Jenkins and a few other staff members from Camp Rower, who had come all the way to Washington to show their support for the program. A Representative Davis from California leaned into his microphone. "Are you suggesting that showing you this superior technology was a kind of psychological warfare?" "I am suggesting," Hanako replied, "that experiencing America's abundance was what convinced me and many others that continuing to resist was pointless. Not because we were defeated in battle, but because we realized we had been fighting against a civilization that we had completely misunderstood." The questions went on for 2 hours. Hanako explained how the simple technology of a washing machine had opened a window for her and the other prisoners, showing them an industrial strength that made all of Japan's wartime propaganda seem ridiculous. "Mrs. Yamamoto," asked the committee's chairman, "Mr. Williams, how many of your fellow prisoners decided to stay in America after the war?" "Approximately 70% of them applied for permanent residency," she answered. "Not because they were afraid to go back to Japan, but because they wanted to be part of a society where ordinary families owned appliances that we had considered to be miracles." After the hearing was over, Hanako met with Captain Morrison and Mrs. Jenkins to talk about the program's future. "The committee seemed to be on our side," Morrison said. "Your testimony really helped them understand that this kind of education is a strategic tool, not just a matter of prisoner comfort." Mrs. Jenkins was smiling. "Hanako, I have some wonderful news. The Whirlpool Corporation has offered you a job. They want you to be a regional training coordinator for their new operations in the Pacific. They need someone who understands both American technology and the Japanese culture." The job offer was more than Hanako could have ever imagined. It was a career built on a skill she had learned while she was an enemy of the country that was now offering her a future. A career built upon skills she had learned in captivity. She was being offered a future by the very country that had once held her as an enemy. "There is one condition," Hanako said carefully. "I want to be able to help set up training centers in Japan. I want to bring this technology to the women of my country who have never even dreamed that such things were possible." "That's exactly what they are hoping you will do," Captain Morrison replied. "They want you to be the bridge between American innovation and Japanese hands." 6 months later, Hanako was standing in a brand new training facility in Tokyo. She watched as a group of Japanese women saw an electric washing machine for the first time, their faces showing the same complete disbelief she had felt at Camp Rower. "Can we really have one of these in our homes?" a young worker asked almost in a whisper. "Someday you will," Hanako answered, a gentle smile on her face as she remembered her own long journey from prisoner to teacher. "But for now, let me show you how it works." As the familiar, comforting hum of the electric washing machines began to fill the room, Hanako thought about the strange and winding path her life had taken. She had been an enemy prisoner, and now she was a cultural ambassador, sharing American technology through the same patient teaching she had once received from captors who understood a profound truth. Real victory doesn't come from defeating an enemy, but from turning them into a partner. 2 years after opening the Tokyo Training Center, Hanako received a letter that would change her life once again. The envelope was marked with the official seal of the U.S. State Department. Inside was an invitation that seemed almost impossible to believe. The American government was asking her to speak before the United Nations on the topic of using technology transfer as a way to rebuild after the war. "Mrs. Yamamoto," the letter began, Your unique experience in connecting American industrial practices with Japanese implementation makes your voice essential in the global conversation about sharing technology peacefully between former enemies. Sitting in her apartment in Tokyo, surrounded by old photographs from Camp Rower and technical manuals for the newest American appliances, Hanako could only marvel at the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. 3 years ago, she had been a prisoner, just learning how to operate a washing machine. Now she was being asked to help influence international policy. Hanako-san, her assistant Kiko said as she entered the room with the day's mail. The representatives from Mitsubishi are here for their demonstration. In the training center's main hall, a dozen serious-faced Japanese executives watched as Hanako demonstrated the latest Bendix automatic washer. It was the same advanced model she had first seen as a prisoner, but it was now being built under license in Japan. "Gentlemen," she explained in formal Japanese, "this machine is more than just a mechanical marvel. It represents a different way of thinking, a philosophy of abundance, not of scarcity, of efficiency, not just of endurance." Mr. Tashima, Mitsubishi's chief engineer, raised his hand. "Yamamoto-san, our research indicates that these machines use too much electricity and water for the average Japanese home." Hanako smiled. She remembered hearing these same concerns in the early days. "Sir," she replied respectfully, "that is only true if you assume that Japanese homes will always be as limited in resources as they were during the war. American families did not always have unlimited electricity either. Infrastructure can be built to create a better standard of living." After the demonstration, she took a walk through the rebuilding neighborhoods of Tokyo. She saw the gradual changes happening everywhere. More and more homes were being connected with electrical wires. Water systems were being expanded. Small shops selling new appliances were starting to open. These were all signs that Japan was slowly beginning to catch up to the American standard of domestic technology. That evening, a welcome and familiar face showed up at her apartment. It was Reiko, her old friend from Camp Rower, who was now a representative for General Electric's operations in Asia. "Hanako," Reiko said, making herself comfortable in the small living room, "I have a proposal for you. GE wants to start a joint venture with a Japanese company. They need someone who understands both cultures to lead the project." "What kind of joint venture?" Hanako asked. "Manufacturing washing machines here in Japan for the entire Asian market," Reiko explained. "It would use American technology, Japanese craftsmanship, and it would be managed by people who learned both systems as prisoners of war." The irony was beautiful. Former prisoners, using the skills they learned in captivity, would now bring American technology to the very nation that had sent them to war in the first place. "There's one more thing," Reiko added. "Mrs. Jenkins is retiring from her government job. She wants to come work with us as our technical director. She says that working with the Japanese women was the most fulfilling time of her entire career." Hanako pictured Mrs. Jenkins, her patient teacher, her unlikely friend, the woman who symbolized the American kindness that had turned enemies into allies, all through the simple act of sharing knowledge. "When do we begin?" she asked. 5 years after the end of the war, Hanako stood on the floor of a modern factory just outside Osaka. She watched as the very first Japanese-manufactured Bendix washing machines rolled off an assembly line. The line was operated by women who had learned American techniques while they were prisoners. This factory represented something that had never happened before: former enemies working together to bring advanced technology to ordinary Japanese families. "Production target achieved," announced Mrs. Jenkins, who was now the factory's technical director and spoke Japanese with surprising skill. 200 units completed this week, and all of them meet American quality standards. All around the factory floor, former prisoners from Camp Rower worked side by side with American technicians and Japanese engineers. Their diverse backgrounds had come together to create something new and powerful. Their combined expertise was creating new manufacturing methods that neither country could have developed on its own. "Hanako-san," Yuki called out, who was now the supervisor of quality control for the entire plant. "We have visitors from the Ministry of Trade." The government delegation walked through the factory with looks of clear amazement on their faces. They took careful notes as Hanako explained how prisoners, who had been trained in America, had now become the foundation of Japan's new home appliance industry. "Mrs. Yamamoto," said Minister Sato, "this whole operation goes against the traditional way of thinking about technology transfer. Usually the defeated nation is given outdated equipment, You are manufacturing the most modern appliances. Minister Sato, Hanako replied. The Americans taught us these skills not as an act of charity, but as a long-term investment. They knew that a wealthy trading partner is better for everyone's interests than a poor enemy. That afternoon, news came that proved her point. Huge orders for 5,000 washing machines had come in from department stores all over Japan. There were also long waiting lists which suggested that the demand for the machines was far greater than what they could currently produce. The middle class is growing, Mrs. Jenkins noted as they looked over the order forms. Japanese families want the same time-saving conveniences that the American prisoners showed them during the war. The statement was filled with layers of irony that everyone in the room understood. A technology that was first used to provide comfort to enemy prisoners was now powering Japan's economic recovery and building a foundation for its future wealth. Mrs. Jenkins, Hanako asked, do you ever have regrets about teaching skills to prisoners who are now competing with American companies? Never, she answered firmly. Competition forces everyone to be better. Besides, these machines are going to be sold all across Asia, creating new markets that American companies probably never would have reached on their own. That evening, Hanako got a telegram from Captain Morrison, who was now working with the Marshall Plan in Europe. It read, "Congratulations on the factory's success. Your model is being used to design technology transfer programs in Germany and Italy. Former enemies are becoming partners through sharing knowledge." As she walked home through the streets of Tokyo, which were now brighter with electric lights and filled with modern comforts, Hanako thought about the incredible change her country was going through. The ruin of defeat was being replaced by a new prosperity, built upon lessons learned from captors who understood that true victory comes from rebuilding, not from revenge. At her apartment, she found a package waiting for her from America. It was the newest Whirlpool catalog, sent by the former staff from Camp Rover, who had become her lifelong friends. As she looked at the pages filled with washing machines, dryers, and refrigerators, she realized they were not just products. They were symbols of a way of life that Japan was slowly beginning to embrace. The war had ended with an American military victory, but the peace was being built on something far more powerful: the patient transfer of knowledge that lifted a former enemy up towards prosperity instead of crushing them into submission. 10 years after her capture, Hanako stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York. She was addressing delegates from 60 different nations on the importance of technology transfer in rebuilding the world after the war. Behind her was a large photograph of the laundry facility at Camp Rover, the very place where a group of enemies first learned to use machines that would forever change their idea of what a civilization could. "Be honorable delegates," she began. "I stand before you today as living proof that the greatest weapon against future wars is not military power. It is the patient sharing of knowledge that helps all nations achieve prosperity." From her place on the podium, she could see familiar faces in the audience. Mrs. Jenkins, who was now retired but worked as a consultant for the UN, Captain Morrison, who was representing the State Department, and Reiko, whose own company had grown to have operations all across Asia. The electric washing machine, Hanako continued, taught Japanese prisoners more about America's real strength than any interrogation ever could have. We learned that our captors had not only superior weapons, but also a superior way of living, a way of life they wanted to share with us, not destroy. After her speech, delegates from many developing nations came up to her with questions. They wanted to know how they could adapt similar programs for their own countries. "Mrs. Yamamoto," asked the delegate from the Philippines, "how can we convince the former colonial powers to share their advanced technology instead of just trying to maintain their economic control over us?" "By showing them that wealthy partners create much larger markets than poor subjects do," she answered. "America makes more profit from selling washing machines to middle-class Japanese families than they ever could have by keeping Japan weak and dependent." That evening, at a reception held by the Japanese delegation, Hanako found herself talking with the Secretary of State, Dean Acheson. He had been one of the key figures who had approved the original prisoner education programs. "Mrs. Yamamoto, your success story has shaped American policy for years," he told her. "We have learned that investing in the prosperity of our former enemies is better for America's interests than punishing them." "Mr. Secretary," she replied, "the real credit belongs to people like Mrs. Jenkins, who saw prisoners as students, not as enemies. And to prisoners like you," he added with a smile. who chose to learn instead of just resisting. As the evening came to a close, Hanako walked through the streets of New York City, still amazed by its incredible wealth, the same abundance that had seemed like a fantasy to her when she first saw it from wartime Japan. Bright electric signs advertised the very appliances that were now becoming common all over the world, a testament to an industrial power that had won, not through force but by demonstration. 6 months later, Hanako opened her third training facility, this time in the heart of a rebuilt Hiroshima-1 in Seoul. Here, a new generation of Korean women was learning to operate the same incredible washing machines that had once seemed like magic to Japanese prisoners. The technology continued to spread across Asia, carried by those who had seen for themselves how it could change lives. A young Korean woman, her eyes filled with the same awe Hanako remembered so well from her time at Camp Rower, asked the familiar question, "Will we ever be able to have one of these in our homes?" Hanako smiled, her own long journey from prisoner to teacher flashing through her mind. "You will," she said gently. "But first, let me teach you how to use it." As the gentle humming of the washing machines filled the air in Seoul, just as it once had in Arkansas and Tokyo, Hanako understood the true legacy of the war. America's greatest victory wasn't won on the battlefield. It was being won right here in rooms like this where former enemies were learning to build better lives together. The peace was being built one wash cycle at a time, proving that the best way to conquer an enemy is to make them a friend by sharing the tools for a better, cleaner, and more hopeful life. Standing in the facility in Seoul, surrounded by the familiar sounds of progress and operated by women who were discovering new possibilities, Hanako Yamamoto, once a prisoner, now a teacher, and forever a student of what people can achieve, smiled and began her next lesson on the transformative power of shared knowledge.